chat, Matt.
Right, I've started recording, so you're on, Martin.
Let's do it. Matt Dix, hello. Oh, sorry, Matt Miller Dix. I'll edit it. I'll start again. Matt Miller Dix, hello, and welcome to the Constraints Collective podcast. How you going? You all right?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Thank you. Sorry, I came a little bit late to the meeting. Or the conversation? Are you in the? Did I hear Ian say you're in the Isle of Man? Was it? Or
No. So
Never said that. I never
so
said
I'm based at the University of Portsmouth, but
yeah,
we relocated to the Isle of Wight.
Isle of
as a
Wight. Sorry.
Yeah. So
Oh wow.
yeah. So it means my commute is a boat ride to work.
How
Wonderful.
cool's that? How long does that take?
So door to door, it's a bit over an hour for me. So it's in the summer. There's probably no better way to travel, but in the winter, it's you're dying for just a shorter commute. But yeah, it's good. It's nice.
More, I bet it's more reliable than the blooming trains in the UK. But anyway, we'll leave that.
Yeah, basically that. I mean, it's cheaper and it's more reliable than the train. So
yeah. Really random, but seeing as Ian's on the call, even though it's the wrong state, I can remember when I was in Manly and I used to jump on the ferry into the city, and with all the people commuting in the morning, it's like, wow, what a lifestyle. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then on the way back, I'm sure, on the way back, I'm sure half of them were off cut, half of the city workers. It's just like, wow.
They call it a sundowner. They have a sundowner and then jump on the ferry. Very nice. I've been on that ferry. Lovely view, scenic.
You wasn't half cut, Keith?
No, not me. I didn't have any sundowners. No, not.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Anyway, we digress. Sorry, go on.
They used to do They all used to do the 6 o'clock swill, didn't they?
Yes.
At 6 o'clock. So they got in about 5 pints. It was like being Derby on a Friday night, like at 11. And they just get stuck in, and then they'd all be fighting outside. Allegedly.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know how we got there. My fault, but we've actually been speaking not about you, well, sort of about you, but in a nice way. So we've been talking about trying to get you on the podcast for a while, Matt, because the subject of penalties has come up quite a lot when we're speaking with the Patreon groups of the members. We've got quite a few football coaches, so I know you've done some research in that area, so we could maybe explore that if that's okay. And then just where you're at in terms of research and what's current and anything exciting that you wanted to share, really, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great.
Do you want to start with telling us a bit about who Matt Miller Dix is and where he's from and what where your journey is?
Yeah. Okay. I'll do the. How long have we got? I'll do the short version. Shall I?
One or two.
So my background, I actually studied at Portsmouth as an undergraduate student and did a first degree in sports science and then a master's in sports performance. And my initial training wasn't really in skill acquisition. I guess, like at the time, and maybe like a lot of sports science degrees, skill acquisition was a small component, but sports psychology was a large component. And during my undergraduate degree, alongside my studies, I started a part-time job football coaching. So working through Portsmouth Football Club, doing coaching primarily with the community office. So just like kids coaching, but also having some work with their development centres that also kind of fed into the academy. And maybe during that time, I started to have some first experiences, questions around skill acquisition, and like also some of my formative experiences of going on like coach education courses. So I think I've Keith and I must have discussed or shared this kind of anecdote before, but I think like one of the first questions for me was I was doing so I was doing like the level 2 or B license, I think it was. And we all had these different coaching topics. You practice the different sessions during the week. And I think I was the only left-footed player on the course. So the whole coaching process that you get taught is stop, step out, then you go in and you do the demonstration of what the player should have done. And so all the way through this week, I was getting quite frustrated because it's typically stop, step out, then somebody would show, here's me doing this with the right foot. And at some point I said to the guy that was doing the session, or the lead coach educator, was, so what, in this instance, should I be, if I'm stopping and then doing the demonstration, should I be doing this right-footed if I'm doing this for right-footed players? And vice versa, if they're stopping me and then doing a demonstration, should they be doing it left-footed? And the guy genuinely said, oh, we'll give you a heading as your assessment topic. So I got like, I was quite like, I guess, started to ask these questions about the process of coaching and how should we coach and things like left-footed and right-footed players and demonstrations and so on. So I guess that got me interested in skill acquisition. And then after I'd finished my master's, I then worked as a research assistant at the University of Chichester, where there was a group of some skill acquisition researchers. So a guy, Terry McMorris, and another, Tim Holder, both excellent sort of mentors, and gave a lot of kind of guidance and support around the topic of skill acquisition. And I was working primarily with Tim, doing a lot of eye tracking research. And it was at that stage that I became really interested in wanting to do a PhD, but then specifically in the area of skill acquisition. And at that point, I then reached out to a few different people, and one of them was Keith. So Keith was in New Zealand at the time. And so contacted Keith. Fortunately, he replied. And after a few maybe months back and forth, there was a scholarship that I could apply for that I was fortunate to get, which took me to New Zealand. And I initially joined an office with Jai Chow and Rob Ryan. I don't know if either have been on the podcast, but I'm sure they're known to a lot of the people on that might be listening. And also Rick Shuttleworth was there as a PhD student at the same time. Started to learn a lot from that community and working with Chris Button and Keith. And it just coincided that they just got a mobile eye tracking system at the University of Otago. So I started to use that in some different pilot testing, and quickly that became sort of the basis of my PhD work, so anticipation, decision-making, eye tracking. And we were then sort of looking for obviously a research question, a research topic, and there was some prior work that had been done on eye tracking in penalty kicks with Geert Savelsberg and others in Amsterdam. And that just seemed like the obvious, maybe because there'd been some prior research in that area, the obvious almost vehicle for studying anticipation and decision making. So that became the basis of my PhD work. And then after my time in New Zealand, but also between New Zealand and Australia, I then initially worked in Cologne, but then joined Geert and John van der Kamp and others in Amsterdam, continuing similar area of research. And then I've been back in Portsmouth now for, was it nearly 12 years, 13 years? So still doing a lot of eye tracking research, some applied experiences with different sports teams and sports organizations, but also some aspects of work outside of outside of sport. So with health and safety executive, for instance, also a project with other external organizations. So eye tracking, anticipation, decision making as a broad sort of vehicle or of broad topic, but then applying in different domains.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that time. I remember a phone call from you, with you actually, from Chichester, probably about
Look
2000.
where that got you, Matt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just shows you the value of, I mean, when you think of the office mates that you had there, people like
it's
Rick,
phenomenal. Yeah.
Ryan, Jay, Chow, I mean, Chris Button, he took a lead role in your supervision, etc. You know, and it came from an applied. The idea came from an applied context, applied performance context, and then you moved into this rich theoretical underpinning, and you know, it's taken you to some fantastic places in the world. A great PhD, very novel, very fresh, innovative. And of course, you know, you're still contributing in that same area, and you know, the similar sort of area, and really making a meaningful contribution. So, I mean, for me, it's like almost like a model pathway that anyone who's interested in postgraduate research and contributing to skill acquisition research and applied, I think that's wonderful. Wonderful example.
Matt, really interested to know. I didn't realise you'd spent time in Holland with John van der Kamp and colleagues. I didn't realise that. So really curious. I find their work fascinating. I'm just curious, like, what did you take away from there? Like, what new knowledge or new learning did you take from that experience? Sorry, I know sorry to put you on the spot.
No. So I think it's a good question. So one of the things that I'm going to answer this in a bit of a roundabout way. So I remember, again, this was quite early in my PhD, and there were some aspects of the design in one of my studies for my PhD that I was reading the work of other people, and I wanted to try and get my, let's say, like the methods right in the design of this research. And some of the work that John had done was really instrumental. So some of the work that John van der Kamp had done was really instrumental in informing that. And I remember having a conversation with, it was probably Keith and Chris, about this. And to which they replied, "Oh, have you actually just reached out to John and asked him?" And so as you know, I'd have been a first or second year PhD student, and that the idea of just what felt like randomly just contacting somebody and saying, you know, can I have some of your time, please, and can you advise on this? And it just felt like a bit foreign to do that. But nevertheless, I did. And of course, like John gave this really lengthy and helpful reply. And from that point onwards, we did have different points of contact during both my PhD, but then when I was initially in Germany. And I think that is a first example of working with John. It's not necessarily a direct answer to your question, I don't think, Martin, but one of the things about that I've experienced of working with John, but it's the same for Keith and Chris when they were supervising me, and a lot of other people actually in the skill acquisition, let's say, sort of community or network, is just, you know, like John is just incredibly generous with his time and his support. So very, like, I think that's something that I really took, is that, you know, he's somebody that I think is really well regarded for his conceptual work and his, you know, experimental work, but also as a person, he just will go sort of out of his way to really help others, which is something then that I at least would like to think that I try and do similar when I'm working with, or I get, you know, contacted by potential students and so on. So that's one thing. I think what I would say again about working with John is that at the VU in Amsterdam, there has been like a real legacy of people in ecological psychology that have worked there. Whether that be, I think, as PhD students, the likes of, I think, Reinald Boetsma, Peter Beek, Frank Zaal, Raoul Bongers, Rob Witthagen, Raoul House. So there's a real community of those sort of ecological psychology researchers with support and influence from Claire Michaels. And even before that with is it John Whiting, although he's not necessarily in ecological psychology, but that kind of lineage of skill acquisition, visual control research. So that is kind of is really part of the culture there in Amsterdam. And I think there's the need for, let's say, kind of conceptual rigor. Like John will really pick you up on the use of whether you use a particular word or phrase in a certain way, and would highlight that is or isn't consistent with an ecological approach. And he'll really go to that minutiae of conceptual accuracy, which in terms of understanding is really, really, really beneficial. So I think just that I guess on the one hand, just being a really supportive person to others, I think is what I took from working with John, and do still take from working with John. And then also the need for that accuracy, conceptual accuracy in a lot of the work that you do is something that I've tried to take through in my own work.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah.
And
really
could that maybe lead us? Sorry, could that maybe lead us on to like I don't know, maybe an overview from an applied perspective as well, like around some of the work, some of the findings, maybe, so we get a lot of coaches and practitioners listening to the podcast. So, any sort of things that people could take away and might find useful in terms of an applied setting, that would be really helpful. So where we're at with the penalty research and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, I think that So at the time of when I started doing research on eye tracking, and this goes back to when I was at Chichester, the eye tracking systems themselves, they weren't mobile, right? So they were, if you were going to record any sort of eye movements of participants, primarily what you would be doing is having people wearing quite hefty headsets that would have cables running from them, connected to computers, and the feasibility of doing anything, let's say, kind of dynamic was really limited. And there was, let's say, a body of evidence that would go hand in hand with the use of that technology. So because you were limited to being able to study eye movements in more mobile or let's say applied settings, typically it would be common that people would try and recreate some aspect of the sport in the lab, and that would typically have been done with videos. And so there's a body of literature that had been built up about here's where people look when they're trying to anticipate the actions of others. That could be, in the case of the penalty kick, it's what information or locations of the penalty taker are you looking to anticipate where a ball might go, and what differentiates good and not so good goalkeepers. And so when I then started doing some of this research with mobile eye tracking, I can remember some of the first pilot testing that I did. And one or two people that I did this with were looking in essentially just very different locations to the locations that all of the literature had suggested. So where in the literature it sort of indicated maybe have this what's called a scan path. So you start maybe by looking at the head of the player, then move down the body towards the kicking leg as a run up, as the player is running up to kick the ball. When I then started to have people wear the eye tracker and actually physically try and stop a penalty, more often than not, they'd spend a large proportion of time just looking at the ball and a lot less time looking at the penalty taker. And so my initial thought was like, this, I've done something wrong here, because where they're looking is not where I think they should be looking, because this is what the literature tells us about where people look. And then that then became like the question that was a key part of some of my PhD was this, you know, to what extent does it matter in terms of the setting or the context in which you're trying to measure things like anticipation in decision making and eye movements. And I think there's something in there that is inherently informative from an applied point of view, is that at least from a research point of view, what we tend to observe that it does matter. So if you're interested in eye movements, maybe even as an extension, something like scanning and decision making and anticipation, and you're asking people to watch a video screen, or you're putting somebody in a situation that is arguably very artificial and not typical of the actual game, potentially what you're measuring from a research point of view is not the skill of the athletes that you're really interested in, but also in the context of maybe training. It's just that question of being mindful that maybe the expertise or the aspects of skill that you're developing may not be the equivalent aspects of skill that are required in the actual game itself. I think that probably at the time of my PhD, and maybe for some of the years immediately afterwards, I was maybe not like, I hadn't had as much experience of working with coaches at that time. So I think that a lot of if I had these meetings with or discussions with coaches about the applied relevance of some of the findings of my PhD work, it was like, and the research that I did after my PhD work, it was a bit almost like all or nothing. Like, well, if you want to improve this, then of course you shouldn't use video, or you should be just putting them in the most realistic situations as possible in training, and you're not going to get any benefits from anything else. And I think what I've found over time is to be more sort of holistic in terms of how I might encounter those kind of questions and those kind of answers. So recognizing that, for instance, in some cases, you might have sports teams or coaches that are interested in developing aspects of anticipation skill or decision making in their sports, the athletes that they're working with, and there might be restrictions on, you know, the training volume that they can do because of they want to reduce the risk of injuries. So then it becomes a question of, well, we're thinking of using technology, maybe using videos, maybe using virtual reality. And then I suppose my question then becomes, and the support that I might try and provide becomes a bit more holistic of, okay, well, if you're trying to improve decision making currently in your training, how are you doing that? And then what is it that maybe in the typical training that you might be doing that you're struggling to develop in terms of improving your athletes? And is there a place for using technology or video as part of a holistic like training development program for your athletes? But it would always be from that holistic lens, rather than saying, for instance, coach saying, right, I want to improve decision making, and there's this new VR product or this new video product that says this can improve decision making. So then you just go exclusively to that technology as this is where I'm training decision making, and not recognizing that the actual time on, let's say, the training pitch that they do is the most important part to improving decision making. But then maybe you can supplement that with some of these additional technologies away from the training pitch. So I think as a kind of roundabout summary, if you're trying to improve things like decision-making, anticipation, and you're looking exclusively at using technology for that purpose, I don't think you're really going to be, from an evidence point of view, supporting your athletes in the best way. But there's nothing, I don't think, that you could realistically say that there's any reason why you shouldn't use it, but use it as part of a really holistic development program where you're using primarily on-field training, your sort of typical training methods to improve those aspects of performance. But if you can reinforce or supplement that through these kind of video or VR technologies, then there's arguably no reason why you shouldn't at least give that a go.
And Matt, go on, Keith, you go on.
Sorry, Martin. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's if you like, the reality of, for example, where you're in an organization, a high performance organization, and the athletes are performing intensely. Like, for example, currently a lot of the top football clubs are playing 3 times a week. One weekend,
exactly,
midweek, the following weekend. And an article that I worked on with Fabianotti and Dave Love, the basketball shooting coach in the States. And he's talking, I mean, the schedule there that they have, performance schedule, the competition schedule is insane. And they're traveling all the time, etc. They really haven't got the opportunities to physically train. And actually, it would be, as you say, a risk factor. So the holistic view is pretty much, do we do nothing? Is it just complete rest in between? Or is there something that we can complement the training with? It's not going to replace it. It's never going to replace it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to complement it, and it's reminiscent of James Gibson's knowledge of the environment. So the best way to help your athletes learn is to within context. And I love the emphasis on context that you put there, Matt, from your PhD onwards. Context is everything there. Knowledge of the environment is best, but it may not be optimal. From a holistic viewpoint, as you said, taking into account physiological demands and injury risk and things like that. And so focusing on knowledge about the environment supports it. So when players get into the environment and they've got practice time, they can use some of those, 1 or 2 key ideas to focus on.
Matt, so I really like this idea of holistic, and that can supplement, more the technological advancements can maybe supplement expertise. So what would the on-field stuff look like from your perspective based on your research findings? And sorry, just to add to that, I when you were talking there, it just reminded me of a chapter you wrote with Duarte and Keith, actually. I'm just looking at it now, selecting among performance as a basis for channeling expertise in sport. So, which I found really helpful for my work. So, yeah, I don't know, any links to that potentially. So I'm really grilling you here, aren't we?
Yeah, no.
Sorry.
Possibly, I don't know. It's the questions are good. It's the answers that are the issue, I think, gents.
No. I'm just thinking, I know from my experience, even Cat 1 academies in the UK that generally tend to have a bit more income, not disposable income, but money they can access, even those environments have not necessarily got access to some of the technological advances that might help.
Yeah,
so
true.
A lot of the work's done on what you might term in football on the grass, so I think some really simple takeaways for coaches in terms of practice design might be really helpful.
Okay.
Just wondering where you're at from that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So if I maybe kind of pick up on the second part and at least just see, again, through some of the research initially with goalkeepers, but I think with applicability to other aspects of research and then applied implications. So one of the things that going back to my these are just kind of, I guess, conceptual ideas that did develop already in some of my PhD work. So I mentioned the benefit of and the great experience that I had of the community of people that I was in contact with during my PhD. And, I think some of the work that Keith and Chris had done, as well as the PhD work that Rob Ryan and Jai Chow were doing was maybe like quite informed by dynamical systems theory, perhaps more so than some work in ecological psychology. And at least with regards to some of that literature on looking at kind of coordination dynamics and movement patterns, there was this real recognition of individual differences and variability. So this idea that if I'm looking to develop the technique of an athlete or the movement patterns of an athlete, perhaps the movement pattern or the technique that one person uses wouldn't necessarily be the best template for another person. And one of the things that I was observing from some of the eye tracking data that I was collecting was something comparable, right? So that some people would have most like for want of a better word, like a signature gaze pattern, but that would be quite different to somebody else. And at the time, the way in which we were presenting a lot of that gaze data, and to an extent, it's still almost like the default way of presenting a lot of those data, is you then average this over your participants and you say, right, here's the scan path of an expert and here's the novice, and let's have a look at the differences. But I was feeling at the time of, okay, but actually within that expert group, I'm representing an average, but actually the average might not reflect what anybody's doing. Like half of them could be doing one thing, half of them could be doing something else. And we just say, here's the average, but it doesn't capture it. And I think one of the things that then, at least from this ecological approach, that really influenced some of my thinking at the time and still does, was this, as you said, Martin, about the concept of affordances, so the kind of perception of opportunities for action, and the idea that this is a relational property. So in particular, the idea that opportunities for action that people might perceive are scaled to their abilities or calibrated to their abilities. So one of the things that I did in some initial analysis with some of the data from goalkeepers was that I had this quite crude way of trying to capture their capabilities, which was effectively like a movement test. So asking goalkeepers to, not under any kind of, it was completely in their own time, but effectively just start in a position in the middle of the goal, and then I would place a football target in different locations of the goal and just ask them to move as quickly as possible from the middle of the goal to these different targets. And through that, I built up a profile of effectively like their agility, well, not their agility profile, but let's say their change of direction profile or their movement profile. And of course, like some goalkeepers take less time to move from the middle of the goal to the corner than others. And that could be a reflection of obviously their size, but their power and so on. And then when I scaled that timing of how quickly they could move onto when they actually moved, when they were trying to stop a penalty, you see those differences start to almost like even out. So a goalkeeper that maybe can't move so quickly from the middle of the goal to the corner, on average, they would be moving earlier than a goalkeeper that can really move very quickly from the middle to the corner. And this then, at least at the time, had this implication and thought process for me of, well, if we're trying to highlight, for instance, as a goalkeeper, here's a cue that you should be looking to try and inform when you move to try and save a penalty. Well, for some goalkeepers, that might be too late. You know, like they might move in the right direction, but they're not that quick. And if I'm saying, right, wait until, for instance, a penalty taker places their standing foot, and the orientation of the standing foot will tell you where the ball's going to go, it might reliably predict the direction of where the ball goes on as much as, I think, like the data suggests, like 70 to 80% of the time. But if a goalkeeper can't move particularly quickly, then they're always going to be arriving too late if the ball is well placed. So there was that recognition that this idea of maybe if you then scale that up to other aspects of, at least again in football and decision making, this idea that your abilities shape the opportunities for action, or they shape your decision making, that the right decision for one athlete or one player isn't going to necessarily be the right decision for another person. And so one of the things that I've done, there's some work that I did with a coach, and what they did, I really like what they did. So they basically built up this, almost like for a couple of players, they almost created this way of assessing their passing ability. So for instance, they put the player in this kind of, it was quite a, let's say, an artificial scenario, but they'd have this, for instance, a defender in possession of the ball, and there might be like 4 or 5 different targets that they'd be asked to try and take a touch and then try and play the ball like this distance, and can you do it accurately along the ground, or can you play the ball in the air over that obstacle to another target, and so on. And they could build up this profile of how good a player was in making some of those different passes or these different targets. And then they could try and then map that onto some of the decisions that maybe the player was making in the context of the game. So if in that initial, let's say, assessment that they might do, they might recognize that somebody is incredibly good at making a pass over, let's say, a distance less than 20 meters and along the ground. But as soon as you're asking that same person to play a pass over a distance of 40 meters and in the air, and then the accuracy just really drops. Well, if you're then, as a coach, trying to encourage that player to play a pass that's over 40 meters and in the air, and then in the context of you coaching that team, you're seeing that they keep losing possession and you're sort of trying to blame the player. Well, you're arguably asking them to make a decision that's outside of their abilities. And if you really want to then improve the decision making, you really should be looking at, like, what are the abilities of that person? Can you develop those abilities? And then map those on to the sort of decisions that you're asking of that person in the context of a team style of play and their game and so on. And I think something like that is quite, it's an idea that you can translate from some of the evidence and the kind of conceptual underpinnings of affordance perception. So that, in short, what might be the right ability for some people, or the right decision or option for some players, won't be the right decision or option for others. And we really need to try and look at how abilities and map onto that decision making when you're developing, coaching and supporting your athletes.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic example, Matt. Really insightful discussion. But I think it really leads us to the constraints model, because some of that is outside of the individual player's relationship, the coach-player relationship, because when you've got environmental constraints, such as, for example, strategical changes in the wider game, and I was looking at some data, I think it was Opta analysis that did it. It shows that the statistical proportion of passes in the short to medium range by goalkeepers has increased in the last few years because of these strategical changes, compared to the longer passes. So in a sense, sometimes you could get someone who is pretty good at one type of aspect of the game, and suddenly these tactical changes that emerge can marginalize them, because I guess in some ways they have to really become quite adaptive and look at skill acquisition or skill adaptation throughout their career, rather than just, okay, as a learner, as a young kid, that's when I learn, and then as an expert, I'm kind of stable in my performance. Yeah. You're continually learning as you go along.
This is really interesting, actually, and it, some people might think, well, that's obvious. Well, it might be obvious, maybe, but we see this playing out all the time. So I see this
Coaching,
playing out. I see it playing out all the time in coaching. It's just coaches getting it so wrong for the ability of the kids or adults, whoever it may be. And I don't know if this is a fair reflection, so please correct me. But I'm just thinking then when we see at the top level, and we'll take football as an example or soccer. So, and this it might be not fair, but the chap, is it Russell Martin, who was at Southampton, was trying to play a very specific way. And the criticism at the time was that the players have not got that ability to play in that particular way, and the consequences were quite clear. So, again, I don't know if that's fair, but I do see this a lot in terms of coaching, when even just some very simple things around, not necessarily around a game model, but what the expectations of the individuals, the participants, the performers are against where their abilities are, and then typically it results in the coach getting frustrated, the people involved with the session not feeling competent, not getting much out of it. So yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think it's a great takeaway for people to think about and maybe reflect on the types of practices they're designing based on the people that they're working with.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of points. Like one, just so on that kind of question around practice design, maybe, and how this relates to aspects of decision making and abilities. So at least in the context of football, small-sided games get used a good amount. And if you, at least anecdotally, at least if I've read or listened to interviews that might include somebody like Pep Guardiola, and then players that have played with Pep Guardiola, he will place a big emphasis on perhaps passing over short distances. And this is why this sort of ideas of rondos or small-sided games or variations of makes absolute sense, because that's very much in keeping with the style of play that he would want to encourage his players to do. But at the same time, you might have, depending on how a team is, let's say, set up, and particularly if you've got youth players, maybe this idea that if you do a lot of that type of training in week to week, it's then to what extent is that typical of or representative of what is happening in the game. So you might have a young player that in training, typically they're only ever passing a ball over a maximum of 20 meters, more often than not along the ground. And maybe even their searching, their scanning is again oriented towards like quite looking within a relatively close proximity, right? They're not looking over longer distances than 20 meters, right? They're not, but then in the context of a game, it's how does that translate to their typical passing behaviors and decisions that they're making? And if in the context of a game, they might be spending, a proportion of time passing the ball over much longer distances, then are you really training, developing, preparing those players in training for the kind of decisions that they might make in games? That's one observation, but also like to kind of bring maybe Ian into the discussion. Though I remember a conversation I had with a cricket coach around, I forget his first, was it Jonathan Trott? Was an English batsman, and in terms of supposedly at the time, he was really, at least according to this coach, was regarded as a really, really good decision maker, primarily because he had, by all accounts, and I don't know, but at least he didn't have the greatest, let's say, bandwidth or range of abilities, but he had two or three shots that he was exceptionally good at. But he also had this ability to then not try to play shots outside of that action profile. So he was very good at, I guess, leaving deliveries if they were outside of this profile. But if the ball was in a position that was very much in line with his bandwidth of abilities, then he would typically then do exceptionally well. And so that ability to differentiate between these, your abilities, your action capabilities, what you are and aren't capable of, and making decisions that are very consistent with that, I think was a really good example. Clearly a exceptionally good batsman, but didn't have probably the greatest range of abilities that you might see from a load of different professional batsmen, but he was very good he had a small range, but he was exceptionally good within that range.
We were actually talking about that on the last podcast, Matt, about Andrew Strauss realizing that he needed to go back to his strengths. And in that team with Trott, I think there was Trott, Cook, they were the best levers of the ball in the world. They knew where their off stump was, which meant, a lever is a good shot in Test cricket a lot of the time. So that was really important. But it made me think, there's a couple of things that what you said that resonated with me there. I played a lot of five-a-side as a kid. But then I was really good at those short passes, but I couldn't see the long pass. So when into an 11-a-side game, I was playing midfield and I couldn't see the 40-yarder, the 50-yarder, but I could play the 10, 15-meter one. But the other side of that is this, I think affordances there's an expectation in a form of life or at specific levels that people should be able to take advantage of an affordance, to take an advantage of an opportunity that emerges. So it has an expectation, there's a value placed on it. So when Trott was leaving those balls, and this is the issue I have with commentators, but also with a lot of experiments on decision making, where they go to expert decisions. Experts say in basketball the player should have shot in that situation because, or they should have passed here because. Well, they don't know what the action, like the quality of your studies is you've got that, you knew the action capabilities. So if you saw that they couldn't make a 40-meter pass and they went, that's poor play. That's unintelligent play, because I know I can't do that. Why would I want to do something despite the coach saying, oh, there was an opportunity there, they should have played that on? Well, it's not an opportunity for that player at that moment in time. So I think that here's an issue with commentators. There's an expectation that
their observation as well. Like they've normally got not quite a 360, but they've got an overhead. It's easy. It's almost like Sabulio moving things about. And it's just gone in. Sorry.
For coaching in there, where do you look as a coach? I remember going back in New Zealand to having to coach 11-a-side on the 17 team. I hadn't watched football from the touchline in an 11-a-side context since 1989 when I was coaching at school in Middlesbrough. So all my view of football had been either TV or in the stand watching, and now I'm looking on the side and I'm trying to work out what's going on. So I had to learn again to pick up, where do I look? What do I pick up? So I think that's a challenge for coaches. Where do coaches look? Like what are they looking for? And what's the format? Anyway,
noticing. Just adding to that conversation, Martin, Ian, and myself, and a few really fantastic coaches have been working on a book chapter for a book that's coming out on the EPPP in professional academies. And one of the points that we're engaging with is where a new head coach comes in and then basically says, here's a game model, a methodology, if you like, and we're all going to play this. All the teams in the club are going to play it. And the young players coming through the academy are going to be prepared because they might have to step into the under 21s and then the first team. So they need to know what the game model is. And we've discussed the idea that actually there's some conflicting interests in terms of coaching for competitive performance and coaching for development, and what is better for the needs of the individual, the young learner, to be exposed to a wide range of skills, activities, methodologies, so that they can adapt, because that head coach may not last for many years. You know, another one might come in. So it's really about that child or that youth player's career, and that goes on throughout the career of a footballer. So even at the elite level, they're still adapting, still learning. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no, so these are, yeah, definitely conversations that I've had with at least, you know, coaches working within academies and professional football and so on is exactly along these lines. So a couple of thoughts that I've often, at least observations, sort of questions of curiosity, more so than it being like something that you can feasibly put in place. So it is exactly this idea that, so the turnover of a head coach or a manager is high, that there's data on that, and that often that might lead to some sort of change in style of play. So why would you not mirror that in the academy? So if you're really preparing your players so that they are potentially going to be part of a first team football environment, they should have that exposure to different ways of playing, because it should hopefully give them a bit more of a rounded development experience. But I would even then sort of go further than that and sort of suggest, well, you know, sometimes if you do have changes in styles of play, that coincides with, it happens midway through a season, and it coincides with a change in the management. So why wouldn't you, at least also in terms of the development of your coaching staff, why wouldn't you consider at certain points in the season, the person that is notionally, let's say, the under-18 coach, then go and work with the under-12 age group, and the under-12 coach goes and works with the under-18 coach, the under-18 group, and they both are tasked with bringing in a different style of play. And then you even just create these, again, like these hypothetical contexts where, of course, at the ages of 18 and so on, there's the importance of, and this is where the ethics and the challenge of it is, because there's the importance of their career and the need for a professional contract and all of the pressures that go with that. But this thing of like, you almost ignore where a team might be in the context of the league, and you create this artificial league table where it's like, right, we're going to create this scenario where we're hypothetically in the relegation zone right now. We've got 7 games left of the season. You've got a new coach that's come in. We're going to change the way that you're playing, and our goal is to try and get this many points over the rest of this season. And
love that.
I love
feels as though it's preparing those players for that, and it's of the career that they're likely to have. But I think also it's giving more rounded development opportunities to the coaches themselves. Particularly, you know, if you've got I would think if I was an under-12s coach, there's often in the UK this sort of thing of like, it's a better job to be with the A teams than maybe it is with the younger age groups, and likewise it's a better job to be with the men's or women's first team than it is with the younger age groups. So if you have an under-12 coach that has that aspiration, well, why wouldn't you give them that opportunity to work up age groups if that's their kind of career trajectory, or their career aspiration? So it's developing, obviously you're hopefully providing developmental experiences to the players, but also to the staff as well, right, that are coaching. And I feel as though there are those opportunities, but I don't know to what extent they then, just actually then whether this is a bit of a, like, from the outside, being a bit too idealistic as to, oh, you could do these things.
I don't think it is, Matt. And like thinking about your early coach education experiences, not too much. Left foot, right foot. This is more coach development, but thinking about if you're a head of coaching, or whatever the sport, and you're using these scenarios, and it's like, it's just been very open and honest. Like, we don't know how this is going to turn out, but what's the worst can happen? We can engage the players, the young people in the process. We can see how it challenges you as the coaches, how it challenges me as the head of coaching, And as long as we're all comfortable with getting it wrong or getting it right, or that is, for me, is a great learning experience. And he couldn't do it over 6 weeks or whatever. And let's just see what happens. I think there's not enough of that. It's too much. These are the things. Well, it's back to this strengths-based thing, isn't it, Ian? These are the things you're not very good at. Let's get them into an IDP, and we'll just focus on these things that you need to get better at. I think it's a much richer way of trying to develop coaches and players. Because when I was giving that example, which I think is class, by the way, you could, I mean, depending on the age, you're going to level it and tweak it slightly, but it could be, well, what do you think we should do? Or how can we go about preparing you better for this new way of playing, for instance? That would be great. I mean, it'd be a great development context to be involved with.
It's a massive tension when one of the goals in the EPPP is learning EPPP. From 12 onwards, it's about learning to win, isn't it? You know, that's one of their set aims. It's learning to win. Okay, so how does that fit with what Matt wants? I think it fits perfectly, but I'm not sure that a lot of coaches would. You know, like, it's about finding one way to win. We win now. I don't know. I'm maybe wrong. It's going to depend on the personnel, isn't it, and what the philosophy of the club is. But what a great idea! And this is this scenario stuff is low hanging fruit, isn't it? Really, it's not hard to do, but it's just the inventiveness or the creativity to think different about what coaching is. You know.
Well, I think not to be too critical, because a lot of the time, heads of coaching, coach developers, they are hamstrung by numbers. So how many people have you delivered to? Do you know what I mean? So, I think this is more than just looking at maybe people responsible for these development experiences, because they are hamstrung to a certain extent. But I think, it's great. I mean, it's got me thinking differently. You're almost you're creating the situation, or you're facilitating, aren't you, through this scenario, which is, I don't know, it's much more meaningful. It's back to the I can't remember his name now, Barab, the education guy. He talks a lot about that ecological learning. Maybe Sasha Barab, I think. And essentially, this is what he's talking about.
Not talking about.
No, not him. No,
stay
on track.
Definitely not. Yeah. Just picking up a point that something he said there, Matt. So one of the pet hates that I have is when commentators and uncritical coaches look at a player and they go, "Oh, this is the new whoever's top of the charts at the time, the new Harry Kane or the new Mohamed Salah or the new goalkeeping legend or whatever, etc." Rather than looking at an individual and thinking, what's this individual style? What are they contributing to the game? What can they bring to it? Rather than sort of, because you hear a lot of these players talk about, oh, when I was younger, person X, player X was my role model. And I get a little bit twitchy about that, because if that means then I'm just going to copy that individual and be the next person X, then that might not be the best thing for the development. So coaches who encourage that and try to sort of get people to imitate how a particular player plays, rather than look at an individual, think, what do they bring? What strengths do they have? What can they bring to the game, contribute to the team? In terms of personal development, that might be better for them. I'm not saying broadly, if you're fast, then you can look at somebody and go, oh, this person does this well. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about sheer copying and imitation of an individual.
Copy, edit.
A couple of thoughts. So one is that, at least, I can't remember the exact definitions, but when I've given lectures on creativity, just with as part of the undergraduate or master's degree programs. And I often kind of pose this as a like a rhetorical question to students, but it's this idea of, in the context of creativity, it's around sort of innovation and doing something new, doing something different. So in the context of coaching, how do you coach somebody to do something that's never been done before? And I give that as a sort of just from the perspective of often what we consider with regards to coaching practices. I'm sure it, and it has changed a lot now, but it would have been, again, going back to some of my own formative experiences, it was often the idea that the coach is the model, is the expert, and it's this is how you should do something. And you're often maybe you're kind of, I don't know, it's not a right thing to say, but you almost feel as though you're coaching things out of people. You're saying, right, this is a different way of kicking a ball, and that looks a bit wrong. So I'm going to stop you from doing that, and I'm going to try and get you to do it this way instead. And only with the goal of course, trying to improve and develop the athlete that you're working with. But just because somebody may have not used a movement pattern in that way before, or a technique in a particular way before, that doesn't necessarily then mean it's not going to be successful if they practice it further and further. The one thing where I have found through like a research study that we did, and then a bit of applied experiences of the use of those video or those kind of like expert models or videos, that has been helpful, was around decision making and scanning. So it's just as part of a wider intervention that we did with some younger or academy sort of age players, or late academy, so on the cusp of sort of professional contracts, was looking at like trying to improve and develop scanning, like the kind of looking behaviors of players, and as a first instance, asking the players to identify moments in games when they have difficulty with this, right? So it could be, for instance, if you're a centre midfielder, one example that maybe springs to mind was a player maybe running back towards their own, so a midfielder player that might be running back towards their own goal to receive a pass from like a fullback or the defenders, or even from a throw-in, and that kind of body positioning and scanning and looking to know whether they do or don't have time on the ball, and whether they can turn or not. And what we did working with an analyst was to get, so that the player would highlight, these are some situations I've had difficulty with, so can you get clips from games of when I'm receiving the ball in this situation? And the player themselves could then start to differentiate between, here's some examples where I do this well, and here's some examples where I don't do it so well. But then also, we did ask players, like, are there people that you see professionally that play in a similar position to you, and can we get some clip examples of them? And it was more of, again, like kind of, to repeat like a word I was using earlier, like holistic. So almost like this triangulation of, here's some examples of you doing this well, here's some examples of you not doing it so well, here's some examples of players that play in a similar position to you, in a team that plays in a similar way to you, receiving the ball in those same areas and locations of the field. And then the player themselves could have, through sort of differentiation of, like the situations when I didn't do this so well, I didn't scan, I didn't look. And so it would just be those kind of things. So it's not necessarily a process of saying this is the way to do something, but providing a range of examples, and then the learner themselves can differentiate between those examples.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge with scanning. In football particularly, because I think there's this there's a perception that it's the amount of scans that somebody makes
Yeah.
And therefore you hear this all the time, check your shoulder, check your shoulder. And it's like, I think it's more about the quality and where you're looking and what information are you trying to perceive that's then going to help you behave more skillfully in that context. I know we've spoken to Darren Hughes a lot about this, Keith. And he shared the example. I'm going to get the name wrong, but he shared the example of Sergio Busquets. Is it the Spanish? He's retired now, so he's not even looking.
The ultimate.
He's not looking at. Yeah, he's not looking anywhere, but he's getting the ball and he's like just flicking it and it's going. So he's obviously, he knows where people are and he's perceiving information, but it's so skillful. So yeah, it's really interesting point.
And where you scan. Sorry, go on, Keith.
I was going to say it's incredibly hard skill. I mean, I found it a really hard skill when I played. I played central midfield, and
still
taking your eye. Walking though, but playing in the kind of traffic, heavy traffic, and taking your eyes off the ball, which might be in flight towards you, and checking your shoulder. I found it hard to do. My method of scanning was pretty much keep the eyes in peripheral vision, and then I could just then use the other sort of peripheral vision to be aware of what's around me. But at the highest level, these players, they're never in the same position, as you know, Matt. They're changing position all the time. So you thought they were on their left shoulder, they're suddenly on your right. You go to turn to your right, bang, and you lose the ball. It's just incredibly hard, really. So I wouldn't want to. I'm not underplaying it. It's all about timing. It's not frequency. It's all about the timing of the scan.
So a couple of things that these are maybe one example from that same research that we did, but then a further one is related to kind of, again, discussions with or working with coaches. So on the example of the kind of the amount of scanning, so as part of the study, we didn't just have midfielders, but effectively attacking players, so wide attacking players as well as forwards. And one of the things that we observed was that, at least for the wide players, they didn't necessarily look to they didn't improve their amount of scanning, but the thing that really changed was their body positioning, right? So they weren't scanning more, but the way in which they were receiving the ball was with the body shape that was a lot more, let's say, open to the game, whereas they were receiving the ball in quite a closed body shape at times before some of the training. So yeah, it's not just the head that's, let's say, scanning or exploring, or even the eyes, but it's the body is playing a massive part in that exploration and that search. And then the other thing is around this was scanning and this idea of like patterns, or even just pattern recognition. And I think that one of the thing is that in the context of at least competitive team sports, is that we have this quite, particularly in sports like football or rugby, we're quite used to seeing static patterns, because they'll put up team sheets and they'll say, right, here's the 15 that are playing in the rugby and here's the 11 that are playing in football, and they're lining up in this formation. And that's almost like a pattern, it's a depiction, but like the actual patterns, they don't exist like that. In the context of the game, the players create the patterns, and they don't. And so when I think this is where, like, at least you have these ideas of it, or you hear anecdotally, again, with some coaches that, and again, like Guardiola's an example of this, where supposedly there is quite a typical pattern or structured way that he might try to encourage the team to set up. But they have to create that pattern. They have to be able to, like, have the advantage over the opposing team to be able to create that. But assuming that you can have those patterns that are created, it would in principle, then make it easier for players to scan, because if your teammates around you are at least adopting a similar positions on the field, then that is already orienting your search for certain locations. Whereas if you had players that were, or you played in such a way where it was a lot more, well, just go on the pitch and improvise and play where you think. When you're in possession, you would always be having to search and scan for where your teammates are, because you don't really have this kind of style or way of playing. So I think there's definitely probably a tension between that. And I would imagine for a lot of coaches where you want to create a bit of structure, but then to a certain extent, once you have that structure, it gives like more of a pattern that then players can work towards and play. So it helps create the team sort of dynamic, rather than just being too almost hands off and saying, yeah, just go and just play, because then I would think that it complicates scanning and search for players when you're looking for teammates.
Yeah, it's got to be aligned to the game model, hasn't it? If you're trying to achieve certain things, then that might start to sort of guide where you might start looking. That's a really interesting point. I think it's got to be aligned to what you're trying to achieve in the context of that game.
Intentionality is, it's framed by intentions, certain, and it's a mix, as you say, because if you prepare players for scanning more, for making these synergies, for taking advantage of gaps, affordances that emerge, etc., they can be better prepared than, say, players that aren't prepared for that. They just want to play, that just think that there's a structured way, and if we are not succeeding, it's because we're not imposing our structure enough. And so it's then intensity, which can lead to injury issues and stuff. So it is a mix, definitely, without a doubt, in my view.
Brilliant. Fabulous conversation.
Yeah, really, really interesting, Matt.
Really rich.
So I found, really good. So I found that all people might find this interesting. So it is Sacha Baron, I got it right. So curriculum-based ecosystems, supporting knowing from an ecological perspective. Really interesting. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah, cool. So thanks, Matt. And I'll be thinking about you on your morning commutes and evening commutes. Sounds great. So all the best with that.
Yeah.
Because it's not like being in the Isle of Man, where it might be a little bit colder and a little bit windier.
Yeah, it's still cool though, isn't it? better than getting the train to Sheffield every day.
From speaking from your experience.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time, Matt.
Really you're welcome, and thanks a lot. Really good to be in touch again. And it's been a while, I guess, certainly for Ian. I don't know the last time we would have been in touch. But, really good to catch up, and thanks for everything you're doing. Thank you.
There's a lot more to talk about. I mean, you've got a fantastic group down in Portsmouth around officiating and refereeing with Tom Webb and people like you. I think we haven't even talked about that side of things. So we'll have to be back sometime later in the future.
VAR.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
Or VAR.
All right. So thanks again, Matt. Bye for now.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.